Hello everybody and welcome to part 12 in the Richard Laymon horror novel review series. This time I've decided to review a novel that I had remembered enjoying very much the first time I read it years ago when I was a teenager. Because the last book that I reviewed, All Hallows Eve, wasn't that good of an experience, so I wanted to try to be a bit more positive in this one. So it's called In the Dark and it's from 1994, I think, which would be 1994, which would be towards the end of his classic period. It's 503 pages long. It's one of his longest books. Oh, the cover art is by Steve Crisp, and it's another great one. You can't go wrong with a moonlit cemetery, can you, for a pulpy horror novel? 503 pages, there's the spine, and listen to this for a really cool premise. It says, "Nothing much happens in Donneville, at least not in the public library. Then the new librarian, Jane Carey, receives an envelope containing a $50 bill and a note instructing her to look homeward, Angel. Mystified, Jane pulls Thomas Wolfe's novel of that title off the shelf and finds a second envelope. This contains a $100 bill and a clue to another payoff. Like the first, it is signed M.O.G., Master of Games. Suddenly, Jane is hooked. This is one game she must play to the end. The game requires more and more of Jane's strength and ingenuity. It forces her more than once to defend her life. It pushes her into actions that she knows are crazy, immoral, criminal. And when she tries to quit, M.O.G. has other ideas." Excellent premise. It's a treasure hunt novel, essentially. And there might be a few spoilers in this, so be warned about that. If you haven't read this but you're planning to, perhaps do so and then revisit this for my thoughts on it. Because, again, it's not easy to really talk about a book like this without giving away a few of the plot points. So I'd like to get the not-so-good stuff out the way first, because I want to end on a positive note with this one. I think it deserves it. I think there are two main potential issues with this book that people will have. The first one concerns the main character of Jane. Now, she is introduced at the start of the novel as this shy, socially awkward librarian. She's 26 years old, with very little social life. She's a very cautious woman, the stereotypical librarian. We get details of her life where she's been unlucky in dating. She doesn't allow herself to get too close to men, very guarded in that way. That's the first chapter, and it escalates from there. Like, within a week, she's literally murdering people. And I think that it could be argued that it's not the most believable character arc in the world. That's certainly a valid criticism, but the way that I would respond to that criticism is to say that if you ever approach a Richard Laymon book asking yourself, how believable is it, blah, 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 I think you're missing the point of Richard Laymon's work. Almost nothing he wrote is believable, and it's not really about that. It's about the insanity of it. So, and it amuses me to read all the one-star reviews of his novels on Amazon, because it's almost always the same criticism. It's people saying that no human being would ever behave the way his characters behave. Yeah, but if you're a Laymon fan, that's actually the charm of his work. You never know what's going to happen next. And there's a scene in this, which I'll get to later, which illustrates that. So, potential flaw number one, Jane's character arc isn't all that credible. But beyond that, she is actually a really cool character, and I liked her. The second potential flaw, and huge spoiler alert here, this book is absolutely fantastic as it's building up to the finale, and it really makes you intrigued to know who is this Master of Games guy and why is he doing this to Jane, and how is he doing it, because a lot of the things that he does seem to require supernatural abilities, and I'm very sad to say that I can't say those questions are answered in a satisfactory way. I hadn't remembered a lot about this book, rereading it just now this summer, and as it was barreling towards the finale, I started to think that this has been such a brilliant build-up. The payoff, the reveal, can't possibly live up to it. Not Richard Laymon. Maybe another writer could, but imagination wasn't Laymon's strongest point, and neither were endings, I should say. And I did get a feeling that, this can't possibly live up to what's gone before. And it doesn't. That doesn't mean it spoils the book. It doesn't mean it's a bad ending. It just means that I'm still left not completely clear on why this Master of Games guy decided to pick on Jane. And he spent upwards of $50,000, I think, getting her to play this game. Why? Why has he done any of that? So those are the two potential negatives. Let me now turn to the positives, which massively outweigh any negatives. The positives are the pacing of this book is exceptional. Few writers in the game were able to have a reader turning pages as compulsively as Richard Laymon. It's quite a long novel, but I read it in 2 sittings. I would have read it in 1 if I hadn't had to go to sleep. It was that readable. The pacing is great, and the scenes where Jane is tracking down the envelopes with the clues, and the envelopes all contain more money. The money is doubled. The first envelope $50, the second one $100, and it goes $200, $400, and so on. The scenes where she's on this hunt are really well executed. They're, by Layman's standards, imaginative. There is a sense of danger in them. I like very much that those scenes escalate in intensity so quickly. Like the first envelope involves her opening up a library book. The second one is a little riskier. It involves trespassing. But from then on, it really does get more and more dangerous and freaky. The one particular scene where she goes to an abandoned house by the cemetery, that was an excellently written scene. Excuse me. I won't say any more about it because if you haven't read it, discover it for yourself. But really cool idea for that one. And excuse me. Another thing which I liked about this book is the relationship between Jane and the guy she meets. At the very beginning of this book, Jane comes across a guy called Brace, and he becomes her partner in this game, and he's also the love interest. I've said before that Layman's women tend to fall in love pretty much instantly. Jane, because she's a librarian, perhaps is a little more cautious here. I think it takes her a full 36 hours before she's crying over him and, madly in love with him like a teenage girl. That's another thing which you just have to accept with Richard Laymon. People fall in love completely instantly, especially women. But it's a nice relationship despite that. It's one of his more mature depictions of an adult relationship, despite what I just said about Jane crying and blushing all the time. Despite that, she does have the occasional adult thought. And Brace is a nice character. I liked him. He's not an arsehole like so many of Layman's men are. So that was a good relationship to take us through the book, because there aren't a lot of characters in this. We do spend almost the entire time in the company of Jane and Brace, so it's important that they are likable, otherwise the book's going to turn you off. Now, about the structure of this book, the main thing that needs to be said. For the first 320 pages, this isn't really a horror novel. It reads like a mystery novel. There's almost no gore. There's almost no of the usual over-the-top Layman violence and sex. It could almost be like a young adult book. Very tame by his standards. And when it gets to page, I think, 320, when she goes on one of the final hunts for the envelope, things take one hell of a left turn. And it's like Laymon remembered he's famous for his gore. And it's one of the most brutal scenes, and I want to say troubling scenes, because it kind of really bothered me just how messed up it was, what happened in this one house she goes to. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. And after I read it, what's really strange is I don't remember that scene from the first time I read it as a teenager. I don't know why I didn't remember that, because rereading all these books now this summer, I haven't reread most of them since almost 20 years ago. I usually remember the main scenes of the books from the first time I read them, but I didn't remember that scene in this book at all, the one I'm talking about with the let me just say it involves cannibalism. And I can't think why that would have not registered, because it's such an impactful scene. Silly in many ways, but still kind of disturbing. But the point I'm making is that when it gets to the final 150 pages, this thing becomes a horror book, and it becomes classic Richard Laymon, over the top, absolutely mad violence and terrible things go on, you know. So what I'm really saying there is, if you start to read this and you're thinking, what is this? This doesn't even feel like a horror novel, stick around to the end. But I don't think you will think that, because I honestly think that from the moment you read the first couple of chapters, you'll be hooked. You will really want to know where this is going. It's such a simple idea, a simple premise, but Laymon is at his best when working with simple ideas. This one, the stake, was such a simple idea. Flesh was a simple idea. All of his best work involves just taking a basic premise, but then taking it in odd directions that only Laymon would think of to take it. So I think that's going to do it for this one. That's what I want to say. It's a very, very highly recommended book. It's one of his best written books. There's the word I most often use in a negative way to describe Laymon's writing is juvenile, but there's very little juvenile moments in this book. I can only really think of the times when Jane blushes at any compliment that this guy, who she has just met, pays her, or when she's weeping over perceived slights that he's made. That stuff, again, shows the lack of characterization that Laymon was famous for. But other than that, it's a well-written book by his standards. And it's highly recommended, like I said. So I think I'm going to wrap this one up. Great story, very easy to read. I recommend it. We'll see where it falls at the end of this series in my ranking. So that's going to do it for video number 12. Thanks very much for watching this, if you did watch it this far. And I'll be back very soon with Lucky 13. I don't know which book I'll be doing, but I think it will be one of his earlier novels, because I like to just go back and forth between the phases of his career. So anyway, we'll find out soon. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.